Welcome to TIP Progress 2 Grant Budget Summary webinar. We will go ahead and get started with some objectives for today. So this morning we will be reviewing updates to the 806 web-based platform, as well as the PDF print version of the TIP. We'll identify the Progress 2 look-fors. Those are two items: that the budget is expended 25 to 50%, and that all budget object codes are within budget. And then I'll also demonstrate correcting any look-for errors that we're seeing in these two items. So I want to make a note: we are going to make every effort to leave some time for some live Q&A at the end. We do have a lot of content to cover today, and an effort to provide quality support. I'd love for you to drop in questions into the chat. If we have some time at the end, I'll try to answer those live. If not, I will answer those in post in an FAQ along with this recording after we complete today. I don't have this PowerPoint version available for you as of yet, but I will also post this PowerPoint with my speaking notes so you have all of the information once this recording is finished this morning. So let's get started. We're going to begin with updates that campuses and LEAs can expect to see on the 806 platform and the print PDF version of the TIP. So first up, most all of you have probably already accessed this. When locating the budget within the 806 platform, logged in online, the LEA will access the budget summary on the Essential Actions page by clicking this button in the top right corner that says Show Budget. So as you're looking at the screen, you click Essential Actions here on the left and then Show Budget at the top right corner. Once that is done, you will see the budget summary pop open in the right-hand side of the screen. A few pieces that will be updated on this screen to support the campus and LEA in understanding and reviewing the budget are as noted here. So first thing is that we saw that we were lacking a total budgeted line in this area. So LEAs were able to previously drop in their total amounts budgeted to each budget object code, but we didn't have it total automatically for the campus and LEA. So that's being added to this process. So you'll see that total budgeted line item here in the bottom of the screen. The screen will also have an added column titled Remaining on the far right. So this will display how much each budget object code has remaining between what has been budgeted in that total column and what has been expended or aligned to the action steps throughout the TIP. So this remaining column on the screen is live. So as an LEA or campus updates action steps throughout the cycles of the TIP, this will automatically reduce and show the remaining as of that point in the login at the TIP 806 platform. So the next screen that will be updated will occur on this Edit Budget Object Code screen by accessing this button at the bottom of the pop-out. So once we click this bottom button, Edit Budget Object Codes, it will open this page fully on the screen for the campus and LEA. On this screen, again, we're going to drop in this total budgeted line so that the LEA doesn't have to calculate this independently. This system will automatically calculate how much has been budgeted in each budget object code. So on this screen, this is where the LEA will be able to adjust how much they've budgeted in each of these budget object codes. Unlike each of these budget object code totals, where the LEA will be able to input this information, the total budgeted won't be editable by the campus or LEA. This will be auto-calculated. So in order to adjust this total budgeted number, the LEA will actually need to adjust the budget object codes along the way. So those are our two updates to the 806 platform itself. Next, we'll talk about what updates will be visible for LEAs on the print PDF version of the TIP. On the print PDF version of the TIP, this is an old image of the previous printed version of the TIP. So you'll see that we were kind of missing a few pieces that were needed here. What we were missing, what we identified as missing, thanks to ESCs and you guys at the LEAs, was that we were missing a few items that were important to support this work. So we missed a subtotal, which is the total amount expended or aligned to the budget object code action steps through the current submission. So where the LEA is now, how much they've expended at that point. We were missing the budget object code budgeted amounts that the campuses had budgeted, and we were missing a difference total here. So these will be updated on this screen as we see on this page. So the old amount here was previous PDF print version named only a grand total amount, which is a little bit misleading for our LEAs, right? This grand total amount showed what was truly expended or aligned to budget object codes up to this point. What we will now see at the very bottom of our PDF print version are two additions. So we're going to have this grand total budgeted amount for every budget object code up until this point. So this will be the same amount that we see on that 806 platform budget summary page. We will also have a grand total spent line item added. So this is the new version. So this will be the total dollar amount that is expended or aligned to budget object codes up until that point. So the old version did not show these two line items, grand total budgeted and grand total spent. We only had this single line item grand total. So these two updates will help support LEAs in seeing holistically what the LEA has budgeted up until this point. These updates will also support SI specialists in identifying some of these progress to look fors that we're going to be identifying here in upcoming slides. So now that we've reviewed just a few short updates about how the budget sections of the TIP will appear different during this cycle, let's review some important general information that will provide context and clarity around what the progress to look fors are. So at this point on progress to the submission that's due March 4th marks the halfway point of the 2021-2022 Title I 1003 School Improvement Grant. This is halfway through the entire grant cycle, and we'll have a visual coming up for this to demonstrate these in just a second. And it's also the 1 quarter point of the 21-23 ESF Focus Support Grant. So we're halfway there for SIG, and we're a quarter of the way through the grant cycle process for ESF Focus Support Grant awardees. So as it's noted here, this point of the SIG cycle, halfway through, is when typically in years previous, when we didn't have this 806 web-based platform, that the LEA would have completed the comprehensive funding report. So as a note, these look fors that we're going to identify in just a moment are the same things that we would have been looking for during that comprehensive funding report submission. We're just now accessing that information via the web-based platform and not a standalone submission from the LEA. So as you can see here, here's the visual representation of the grant project timeline. This top timeline is the 21-22 Title I 1003 School Improvement Grant. The grant application posted in September. Most LEAs received NOGAs in December. We're sitting right here at March 2022, where we're halfway through this grant cycle. The school year will end early June, and then this grant program ends in September for these funds. So we're about halfway through this point. For the bottom timeline here, that's the 21-23 ESF Focus Support Grant. Awards were announced in July. We're sitting in March, halfway through the first year of this grant cycle. The school year again will end in May or June. September will start the new school year. March of 23 will be 3/4 of the way through this grant program, and we're requesting this data again, but we'll discuss that at a later date. And then in September of 2023 is when this grant program will end. So just a visual here of these are the points in the total grant cycle of where we are for these two grant programs supported by the Division of School Improvement. So we have a little context about where we are holistically in grant cycles. We've reviewed how we will see differences in the TIP budget sections on the 806 platform. So now let's identify what the look-fors are that TEA SI specialists will identify during the review process for TIP Progress 2. So as we've stated, during the Progress 2 cycle submission, the Division of School Improvement will be looking for these two items. Specialists will expect to see that 25 to 50% of the funds budgeted on the TIP be expended or aligned to action steps. The second look for is that each budget object code is within budget. What this means is that no budget object code will appear in red on the print version of the TIP. So again, as I've said, these look fors are similar to what would have been submitted during the comprehensive funding report, also often called the mid-year funding report, for previously awarded Title I 1003 school improvement grant funds. These two items are now embedded in the web-based TIP, in the print version of the TIP, and we will be looking for those in this fashion instead of on a standalone submission. So we'll review each of these items a little bit further in upcoming slides. So first look for, let's identify what's going to happen, what the LEA will be expected to demonstrate on this look for number one. And we'll also talk a little bit about what happens if this look for isn't seen during the review process by the LEA specialist. So 25 to 50% of the budget is expected to be expended. So this is a screen grab from the newly updated PDF print version of the TIP. The bottom of this screen demonstrates, or the bottom of this page, the PDF print version of the TIP, demonstrates the entire budget holistically. So every budget object code has a total budgeted amount and a total spent, total grand total spent. So the quick check here is that the LEA has budgeted $107,000. We've clearly expended $36,000. As a quick mathematical solution, 36,000 divided by 107,000 is 33%. So this would get a quick check by the specialists. The LEA has demonstrated that they have expended kind of this range of funds and will be moved on. We'll discuss on the next slide some reasons for this range and some caveats about carryover funding for this range as well. So this is how we will check this. As specialists are reviewing this Progress 2 submission, this is where they'll go. They'll do this quick calculation, visual check to make sure that this look for is met. And then in the upcoming slides, we'll discuss what next steps need to be taken. So we know a few things. The reason for this range of the amount that we're expecting to see in the budget expansion is that the LEA has some discretion to reserve funds to support campuses in closing the gap, right? So at campuses that are Title I served within one level of the direct feeder pattern, right? For students that are entering our campuses awarded a grant or exiting campuses that are awarded a grant. So we might not see the entire award amount allocated to an individual campus. We also know that in the expansion of the ESF Focus Support Grant, that's 2 years, the LEA didn't give a ton of guidance around how to budget those funds. So we know that the LEA has allocation amounts in 30% for the ESF Focus Support Grant, 50% of reserve amounts in the School Improvement Grant. That is inclusive of all carryover dollars. So if the LEA received funds, new funds in the amount of $14,285, and then received additional funds allocated from carryover from 2021 and budgeted on that budget object on the TIP budget summary, we'd expect to see 25 to 50% of the carryover funds allocated to that campus also expended. So we won't see there be a separate line item necessarily for carryover, but as the LEA adjusts the allocation to the campus based on carryover being included now, we'd like to see that 25 to 50% is expended at this point because we are halfway through that SIG grant cycle. So what if we get to this point, your LEA has submitted your TIP, your specialist is reviewing, and your campus hasn't expended 25 to 50%. So let's be really clear. This is not a scoreable item on your TIP rubric. So there won't be points deducted if your LEA has not met this opportunity to leverage 25 to 50%. This is the intention of this look for is to support the campus and LEA in leveraging all grant funds in the current grant program, as is the expectation for all state grant programs provided by the agency. So specifically, the Division of School Improvement is interested in providing clarity, guidance, and support to your LEA in leveraging these grant funds and aligning them to the work of your targeted improvement plans. This time frame of the submission of the March 4th Progress 2 submission is a really powerful time to ensure that the campus and LEA is prioritizing aligning funds to continuous improvement efforts and work, and identifying needs in adjusting how you're leveraging funds to exhaust your funding allocation by the end of the grant cycle. So while this is a check that the specialist will provide in an effort to offer better support, it is not a scoreable item on your rubric. There won't be any compliance regulation pieces associated with not meeting this look for. It's an opportunity for the agency to better support your LEA and your campus, and then also to connect with me if there's additional training or support needed to move forward in leveraging your funds throughout the remainder of the grant cycle. So our next look for number 2, we'll review very quickly what the look for will be and what happens if this look for is not seen. And this one is a little bit more intense in what's to come. So look for 2 is that all budget object codes are within budget. You'll see this screenshot here of the PDF print version of the tip. So on this PDF print version of the tip, each budget object code, you see this is a display of 6,200 professional and contracted services, totals every cycle and every action step up until this point that the information is pulled, and provides this information for each budget object code. So a little mini subtotal. So the subtotal amount is how much has been expended by the LEA or aligned to action steps along the way. So this is how much has been spent. There's also a line item, as we've discussed, for budgeted budget object code amount. That's how much the LEA has allocated to this specific budget object code. And then there's this difference line, this plus minus difference line. This is the budgeted amount minus what's been expended, right? Obviously the difference. So this box on the PDF print version will display colored text. There's 3 different options for colored text here. This box will either have green colored text, as you can see here, if there is funds still remaining in the budget that haven't been expended or aligned. So this is a positive number. Green means that you still have money to spend in this budget object code. There could be black text in this difference box if the difference amount is $0. If the LEA or campus has expended the exact amount that has been budgeted, this text will appear green. If the text, as we see here, is red, that means that the plus minus difference line is in the negative, right? The LEA has expended more than they've budgeted in this budget object code. So this will be the quick check for specialists reviewing for Progress 2. They'll scroll down the PDF print funding summary page and check for any red indications in the difference lines for each budget object code and the total budget itself. So the most common reason we have seen for this overspend, right, this red indication on this in this difference box, is that an LEA has copied an action step from one cycle to the other that had a fund associated with it, most oftentimes a large lump sum payment likely to TIL or an external VIP. So as you can see here, this LEA has copied the action step in cycle 1, step 3, training for 4 CLT members at $30,000 from this cycle to cycle 2. This is often why we see overages or red indications on the TIP budget funding summary page. What we would like to see is this adjusted to correct that red indication. So you're not overspent essentially in your budget object code, but also so that your LEA is aligning funds correctly to each action step along the way. So if this is an error, we're going to move forward as if this is an error in copying an action step from one cycle to another. And we'll walk through how to correct this type of error. So what if our campus has an error that results in overspend in the budget? So this is not, again, reiterate, this is not a scoreable item on your TIP rubric. So if you have a red indication on your budget summary page, your LEA will not receive any less points for this than it would have if it was correct. The campus and LEA, if this is an error in copying an action step from one cycle to another, we'll have two options in correcting this overspend error. I'm going to name them here and then we'll walk through each of them. So the first option for an LEA with this error in copying is to divide the total amount of the expenditure over the number of cycles the action step will appear. So for this example, we're assuming that line item of $30,000 is a till cost, and it will appear in those two cycle submissions, so cycle 1 and cycle 2. So the LEA or campus can divide that total amount aligned to the action steps by 2, inclusive of $15,000 in each action step. We'll walk through what that looks like on the 806 platform. The other option is that the campus and LEA can zero out all fund sources after the first action step that includes that large lump sum payment. So let's walk through what each of those look like in correcting this error for your LEA. So we'll use this example as I've showed of over budget to walk through the options to correct this error. So we're going to keep an eye on these two. Cycle 1, action step 3, training for CLT members of $30,000. Again, we're making a few assumptions here that this is a single lump sum payment to participation in a till cohort for these 4 CLT members. The work continues throughout cycle 1 and cycle 2, but the LEA isn't paying each cycle the till cohort fee of $30,000. They are participating in the training each cycle that is submitted. So let's correct the error. So the first option is divide costs across the action steps. So you'll see here I have side-by-side screenshots for these for this option. So action step 3 and action step 6 of our 2 cycles. These are screenshots from the web-based platform on the essential actions as LEAs are entering this information. Once you've submitted, you can always go back and adjust these to correct any errors or issues that you have along the way. So we're going to, exactly as it says, divide costs across action steps. So the total cost for participation in till for these 4 CLT members is $30,000. So we're dropping back in to action step 3, adjusting the funding amount to $15,000 for this action step, dropping back into action step 6 that was copied from action step 3 to action step 6 in cycle 2, and we're adjusting that dollar amount to $15,000 as well. This adjustment will correct our budget to total that $30,000 lump sum payment. So you'll see action step cycle 1, action step 3, training for CLT members is now displayed as $15,000. Cycle 2, action step 6, training for CLT members is $15,000. Now our budget isn't overextended by $30,000 because we've totaled that $30,000 between these 2 action steps instead of copying the funding associated with till participation 2 times, so doubling that cost essentially. So this is option 1 for creating that correction, dividing costs across action steps. Let's look at the next option for correcting this error. So the other option is to zero out the funding sources that are copied. What this means is, again, we will drop back in to the action step that has been copied, in this case, action step 6 in cycle 2, and we'll move from $30,000, because we copied from the first action step that was, the total was $30,000. We're just going to drop back in and zero out that dollar amount. This will provide two different things. So first, it will allow the LEA to demonstrate that they are having a cost associated with this action step. It's just not an ongoing cost. It's inclusive of that one lump sum payment to TIL cohort. And it will also allow for the budget to be corrected and not overspent $30,000. So with this change, we changed action step 6 from 30,000 to 0 for the copied action step. In this example, the LEA would then leave cycle 1 action step 3 alone. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. That should say 30,000. The LEA will leave the original cycle 1 step 3 training as $30,000 and then zero out the second action step, which will again correct their error, their red error over expenditures, to indicate that total lump sum of $30,000. It will still show up in cycle 2, step 3. So we know that there's still a cost associated. We'll just be able to identify that it was a one lump sum payment during the first cycle and not an ongoing cost for our LEA. So again, our look for here is that we don't want to see anybody overspent. If it was an error due to copied action steps, there's a way to correct it, and we're happy to walk you through that process. However, if your campus has truly overspent in a budget, I'd like to reiterate a few things. First, this is not a squirrable item. So if you've truly outspent in a budget object code, expended or aligned funds to action steps, and out budgeted or out expended your budget, the LEA should do a couple of things. The intention of this look for, again, is to support campuses and LEAs in identifying where the campus is spending funds associated with their work of school improvement. So if there needs to be adjustment at the campus level on this web-based platform. The look for will also help the LEA identify if the overspend is happening at the campus level associated with the funding allocated by the campus to this TIP, or if it's like a larger challenge and the LEA might require the submission of an amendment to the total grant program. So the LEA and campus should plan for continued conversations in identifying if the overspend needs to be adjusted at the campus budget level on this TIP web-based platform, if there just might have been an error or we just didn't anticipate how much we would need to spend from a certain budget object code. And the LEA should also identify if it needs additional support in submitting a grant amendment for the entirety of the grant program. And the specialist will help support that process by connecting you with me, the manager of grant strategy and alignment, to help submit that grant amendment and make sure that you're in line with grant guidelines. So again, the intention here is not to score this section of the TIP web-based platform. This is intended to support the LEA in leveraging funds, aligned to the grant program, aligned to the work of school improvement and continuous improvement, and support you in doing that work and conceptualizing the funds supporting the work of school improvement. So again, this time frame, this March 4th submission, is a powerful time to ensure that the campus is prioritizing aligning funds to continuous improvement and leveraging all grant funds for the remaining months of the grant term. So we've identified our two look fors. We've identified where we will see updates to the budget summary at this point. We do have time remaining, so I will open for some questions. I see that there is a few in the chat, and I will start at the top here and then answer through. If anybody has any remaining questions, please drop those into the chat so that I may capture those in an FAQ for everyone moving forward. I'd love to have everything in writing just so there's not confusion about what needs to be adjusted. Yes, we will share this PowerPoint in addition to the recording and FAQs. So that will be posted to LEA grant pages. Dr. Renfro, thanks for your question. Campuses shouldn't change budgeted amounts to cycle expenditures. The total budgeted amount, I'll jump back if that's helpful. The total budgeted amounts here shouldn't change necessarily unless the campus is getting allocation from carryover that has adjusted that, or if the LEA needs to make an adjustment to the allocation in general. This allocation, so whatever the total budgeted amount for the campus, should be what the campus expects to spend for the entire grant program in a single school year. So SIG campuses are budgeting for the 2021 school year for that campus. ESF focused support grantees that have a 2-year grant are only creating this budget for the single year. So for 21-22, they will do another budget for 22-23 at that time. Did that answer your question, Dr. Renfro? I see your hands up.
Oh, only in part. So, because you and I had this conversation a while back. So now we're going to say that I need to go in, help my campuses adjust this just to 1 year budget of the available funds, because then you're going back to saying they should be expending about 50%, and you were talking about 25%. And the other thing is you've been using budgeted and expended, and we don't normally go back and put just the expended amounts in these. We generally stay with the budget, although you might adjust it if they adjust their budget.
You answer your first question, and then we can discuss your second question. So yes, you're correct. If you're only budgeting for a single year, we should see ESF focused support grantees spending 50% of their budget. However, we gave no guidance. The agency gave no guidance about how much the LEA should budget between year 1 and year 2. So we are providing that kind of flexibility if they have not expended a portion of what they expected to spend in year 1 versus year 2. So we're allowing that flexibility of 25 to 50% for a couple of reasons. One, there's 2 different grant programs running. The second, that there's one grant is 2-year grant and not a single year grant. And then additionally, carryover that's dropped in, lots of LEAs are just receiving carryover for SIG. So you might not have met that 50% if your carryover was quite significant for your campus. So instead of making everyone essentially budget carryover that they might not have had access to until recently, we're giving that kind of a window of flexibility in what we expect to see expended. Now, tell me your second question again and give me some clarity.
Second question, or what I had posted, was you've been talking expended, and that's what actually shows up grand total spent, but in reality, it's going to be grand total budgeted, because we don't generally go back and put actual expenditure. We don't go back and adjust the budget to actual expenditures in a plan. So I just want to make sure that you aren't, when you say grand total spent on that report now, you're not actually expecting us to go back and put in, I may have budgeted $2,000, but the actual for that cycle was $1,895 that was spent. So if we're not going back and adjusting those amounts in these budgets, they're always going to be budgeted amounts, not spent amounts.
Correct. So let's look at, let me find a slide that will share the correct thing I want to look at really quickly.
Well, I mean, because it does say spent on the printout reports now.
Right, and so that's what you've actually aligned to action steps. So you might have budgeted 2,000, right? If you aligned the actual expenditure to your action step that was $1,879, your difference line will have that $125 remaining. But I don't expect your budget to exactly match what you've expended, if that makes sense.
Right.
We don't necessarily need to see these zeroed.
We don't have to go back in and change that 2,000 on the next cycle to say that, oh, in cycle 2, we only spent 1,829. We can leave it as the 2,000 that was aligned to the action step.
Correct, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Charlene, yes, the comprehensive funding report was the same as like the mid-year, kind of got a couple of different names over the last few years. Comprehensive funding report that is no longer a standalone submission was the same as mid-year funding report. We 25 to 50% expended funds does include carryover. That's why we kind of gave that range. Again, as I said to Dr. Renfro, we're allowing for giving flexibility for that like range of funds to be expended because we know LEAs very recently received carryover dropped into their budgets. They're probably still doing a lot of that work of allocating those funds to campuses that are engaged in this work. So we don't necessarily need to see 50% of like everything that is now inclusive of carryover expended. We'd like to see somewhere in this range expended because the LEA should have been planning for expending those carryover dollars because they had an idea that that was coming. So yes, it is inclusive of carryover as it's allocated and awarded to campuses or allocated to campuses. I should have these slides up for everyone at the by the end of the day. Hopefully, I'll send it over to IT as soon as this closes and have them post. They usually are pretty quick with turnaround. I don't anticipate that it will take much more than 24 hours, though. Still have a few minutes remaining. Anybody else have questions I can answer? Okay. Thanks everyone for joining. Again, my name is Alice Keller. I'm the manager of Grant Strategy and Alignment. Here's my email address. If anybody has any questions, if you need one-off support, I did see a couple of folks drop in that they want some individual support for making an amendment or discussing some more like personalized details. Happy to do that. Shoot me an email and we can set up a time to connect independently. If there's anything else you need before your Progress 2 submission, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know so I can fully support you guys. Thanks for joining.